There's a new day dawning, the time is at hand, where the glory of the Lord will be revealed to every man. Open the door, open the door, open the door, and let the King of Glory in. Open the door, open the door, open the door, and let the King of Glory in.
All right, let the King of Glory in. Open up the door. Starts right now. So fling wide to you heavenly gates and prepare the way of the risen Lord. The Apostle John was on the island of Patmos. He was in prison for the testimony of Jesus Christ. And he heard a sound behind him. He said, behold, I looked. There was a door standing open in heaven. And I heard a voice which was like a trumpet speaking with me, saying, come up here, and I will show the things which must take place. That's what we need, my friends. We need a heavenly perspective of the things that are going on in the world around us, the things that the Word of God foretold us would come to pass, those things which must take place, those things which are taking place even now. That is what this broadcast is all about, discussing the issues of the day, discerning the times in which we live from a biblical perspective and worldview. Good day, everybody. Andy White here. What you are about to hear is the fusion of heart, mind, and soul. I want to welcome everyone from all across the fruited plain and all around the spherical globe. Thanks for tuning in to this week's edition of Open Up the Doors. And I am streaming live, of course, over on my Open Up the Doors Facebook page over at facebook.com/faithfm91.7. If you're joining us over there, give us a cyber high five and let me know where you are watching from. And I do plan on going to the phones in the second hour, 631-725-2069. If you would like to call in, be part of the broadcast, part of the program today in the second hour, write down the phone number now, 631-725-2069. And I'm going to jump right on it and truncate my opening preliminaries because I literally do have a ton of stuff on the palette today. And this is going to be one of those broadcasts, brothers and sisters, that you're going to want to download. And seriously, you're going to want to download it. You're going to want to save it once it's posted on YouTube and Rumble, because the broadcast today is going to be your, I hope in the future, your go-to historical compilation of the historical facts regarding the canard and the political hoax known as a two-state solution. Before I get into the historical facts, I'm just going to get on my soapbox a little bit before I get into the weeds of some of those things. But in the book of Joel, most of you are very, very familiar with this passage of Scripture in the book of Joel, chapter 3, verses 2, where God declares, the God of Israel declares, that I will also gather all the nations, all of them, and I'm going to bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and I'm going to enter into judgment with them there on account of my people, my heritage, Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations. They have also divided up my land. That's going to be the key anchor point for today, because this is what a two-state solution is all about, dividing up the land of Israel. And God says it's his land. Let's get those facts straight. It's his land, and he has the right to give it to whom he wants to. And as an eternal possession, he's given it to the sons of Jacob, the 12 tribes of Israel. But we've got this rhetorical, political verbiage that goes on for the last, approximately 40 years or so, 50 years, called the two-state solution. But I want to tell you, folks, a two-state solution as voiced and presented by the Arab and Palestinian powers is a deliberately false claim presented with the intent to mislead. It is a duplicitous phrase, the two-state solution. It is a canard. It's a hoax, and it's political fiction. The repeated Palestinian Arab rejection of concrete two-state proposals and arrangements over the last 80 years, which we will get to in a moment. Repeated rejections of the very thing they claim they want. It proves the idea was never generally accepted by Palestinian leadership, and that the continued international insistence on a two-state solution, it really functions merely and totally as a rhetorical device rather than a realistic path to peace. I'm going to say it again. The two-state solution is a two-faced duplicity. The Arab states have never wanted a Jewish state. They have never wanted a two-state solution from the very beginning. They've opposed it, as the historical record clearly shows. And I will go through that historical record in detail in a few moments. But I want to tell you this two-state solution. Oh, it sounds so rhetorically nice. Oh, we want to have two states living side by side in peace. Yeah, that would be wonderful, wouldn't it? But it's a smokescreen. The verbiage of a two-state solution is actually, brothers and sisters, just a euphemistic rebranding of the final solution. You know that phrase, the final solution? The full phrase in Nazi Germany was the final solution of the Jewish question. Of course, it originated as a Nazi euphemism, the final solution. It was a Nazi euphemism for their plan to systematically murder the Jews of Europe. The final solution was the Nazis' coded term. What are you saying, Brother Andy? The two-state solution is a coded term. The final solution was the Nazis' coded term for the deliberate state-organized genocide of European Jews that resulted in the murder of approximately 6 million Jews, as you well know, between 1941 and 1945. The phrase, the final solution, was deliberately bureaucratic and euphemistic to obscure the reality of industrialized mass murder. Listen to that statement again, because I want you to draw connections and see the analogies and the rebranding of the two-state solution. The phrase, the final solution, was deliberately bureaucratic and euphemistic to obscure the reality of industrialized mass murder. That is exactly what the terminology of a two-state solution is. It is purposefully bureaucratic and euphemistic in order to obscure the reality of a genocidal intention. And history proves it. What do you think? The mantra, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. What do you think it's implying? If not blatantly stating. It's a genocidal statement coming from people who are falsely accusing Israel of a genocide that is not happening. But again, the two-state solution is nothing but a ploy and a deception. It is nothing but the covenant death of Isaiah 28:14 through 25. Sadly, that will come to pass one day. And Isaiah 28:14, 25 will be fulfilled under the guise, under the auspices of peace. Peace for land. Two-state solution. You see all these anti-Israel protesters waving their Palestinian flags and holding up their placards and banners that say, "Free Gaza." Well, Gaza was free. Israel left Gaza in 2005 for a so-called land for peace deal. What happened next? The Israeli evacuation and disengagement from Gaza did not bring peace, did it? Hamas took over, ruled for 20 years and is still ruling in Gaza, by the way. Hamas, the leadership of Gaza that was voted in by the Gazans, stole $26 billion in aid and spent it all on terror tunnels and rockets and weapons, then attacked Israel and butchered civilians on October 7th, 2023. It is truly astonishing, folks. It is truly astonishing that after October 7th of 2023, that anyone, and I'm talking about in the West as well, can still argue that a Palestinian state would bring about peace and security. The Gaza Strip, with a population of just over 2 million Palestinians, already served as a test case for Palestinian self-rule. After Israel removed every soldier and Jewish civilian from the Gaza Strip in 2005, Palestinians received an opportunity to build the foundations of a future state. But instead of focusing on economic development, institution building, and peaceful coexistence, the Iran-backed Hamas seized control of the territory in 2005 and transformed it into a base for jihad against Israel. Billions of dollars, as I alluded to a moment ago, in international aid flowed into the Gaza Strip. Most of the money was diverted to digging tunnels, manufacturing rockets, and creating a military infrastructure designed for one purpose: the destruction of Israel. And yet, the mindless, useful idiots of Islamo-fascists just keep parroting their inane and intellectually vacuous "Free Gaza and stop the occupation." The anti-Semites and the anti-Zionists all scream that Israel stole the land. But here's the truth, and here are some facts. And we're going to be going down a lot of historical facts that cannot be refuted. Because let's begin from somewhat of the beginning, in a sense, of the layout and the boundaries and the territories of the modern iterations of the Mideast countries and the Levant. Because the modern nations of Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, and Israel were all formed in their current modern day borders around the same time. They were all carved out from the Ottoman Empire's ruins. And all of these modern iterations of these nations have historical roots associated with their boundaries, including Israel. All these modern states have the same origin as far as recent history is concerned. They were sliced and diced up territories after 2 world wars, beginning with the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Some of you have probably heard of the Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916. I'm not going to get into all the weeds of that, but we need to understand the history. The Sykes-Picot Agreement in 1916 was a secret agreement between Britain and France during World War I to divide much of the Ottoman Empire's Arab territories into British and French spheres of influence after the war. In simplified terms, Great Britain would dominate areas including much of present-day Iraq and influence Palestine. France would dominate much of present-day Syria and Lebanon, which we have seen in the previous decades. The Sykes-Picot Agreement disregarded many existing Arab political and tribal boundaries and local aspirations for independence, but it became one of the foundations for the post-World War I political map of the Middle East. Although the final borders differed considerably from the original Sykes-Picot plan. But in short, the Sykes-Picot plan was, again, it was an Anglo, a British-French plan to divide the Ottoman Middle Eastern territories into British and French dominations, influences. So after World War I, Britain gave us Jordan in 1946. France split Lebanon in 1943 and Syria in 1946. Egypt broke with British chains in 1922. And Israel, of course, in 1948. Yet, I said all that to say this, yet only Israel, tied to 3,000 years, if not 4,000 years, of Jewish history, temples, coins, scrolls, gets branded as a colonizer. Why? It's not history's fault. There's never been a country called Palestine. The Jewish people have a connection to the land that they're in that goes back thousands and thousands of years. 4,000 years, actually. Yet something I repeatedly reiterate because it's simple. It's a simple historical fact. Some people get upset when I bring it up, but it is a simple historical fact. There's never been a recognized sovereign nation or a genetically ethnic people group called Palestine or Palestinian. They are Arabs and Egyptians. That's simply an historical fact. A fact that the founders of the Palestinian Authority and the PLO themselves have openly admitted. And even before 1948, my friends, even the Jews were called Palestinians. It was just a reference to a geographic area that was really dubbed that by the Romans in the first century to disparage the Jews. Palestinia was a form of the word Philistine in Latin. And the Romans just simply started calling it that to impugn and disparage the Jews because they were at war. The Romans, obviously, after 70 AD and finally in 135 AD, scattered the Jews. They began calling that area Palestinia. But it wasn't because of any particular people or ethnic group, because they were Arabs and Jews and Syrians. But leftists are always ranting about stolen land, colonialism, and colonizers. But they don't complain about that with any of these other nations. Why is that? Well, we all know the reason for that. They are historical ignoramuses. These leftists and these anti-Semites who are generally devoid of any knowledge and of any factual historical contexts. But they are definitely masters. You got to give them credit for this. They are masters at rewriting and redefining history in order to suit their own agenda. But I digress. I'm going to keep this first section short because I got a lot of stuff I'm going to get to. We're going to take a little bit of a stroll down memory lane. And I'm going to lay out the historical record of why, and to prove that the two-state solution is a canard. It's a hoax. It's a rhetorical device. It's a rebranding. I'll say that again. The two-state solution is a rebranding, a euphemistic name change of the final solution, because that is the intent of the Islamic leadership. I'll get into that in the historical record when I come back. This is Kent Henry.
I have a destiny.
I have a destiny. And we all do.
I know
and so does Israel.
Fulfill.
I'll be back in a moment.
Somebody knows it. I have a destiny.
Wow. That completely just stopped. Okay, welcome back. Andy White here on the radio, tearing down strongholds. You're listening to Open Up the Doors, Integrity in Broadcasting here, Faith FM, WEGB 90.7 and 93.3 in that peak, and WEGQ 91.7 in Quag. That took me by surprise. That song just cut out. So we'll just go back. I guess the Lord wants me to really get on with it here because there's so much to get on with. Hallelujah. But integrity in broadcasting. Faith FM, WEGB 90.7 and 93.3 in that peak, and WEGQ 91.7 in Quag. Let the light in and let the truth out. Well, folks, we're going to take a little bit of a stroll down memory lane because this generation of Islamo-fascist, Hamas-hugging Palestinian flag wavers are historically illiterate ignoramuses. So a history lesson is a much-needed exercise. I know that sounded gruff. I know it did. I sometimes I can't help myself. But you know what? They are willfully ignorant because this stuff isn't hidden. It's really not. But I digress. But so what do the following countries have in common? Egypt, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Pakistan, and Turkey. Well, they all voted against the creation of a Palestinian state in 1947. Let me repeat that. For those who might be a little bit, hard of hearing, I don't know. What do Egypt, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Pakistan, and Turkey all have in common? They all voted against, not for, they voted against the creation of a Palestinian Arab state in 1947. But I thought they wanted a two-state solution. They never have. In 1947, it was called the UN Partition Plan vote. On the 29th of November in 1947, the UN General Assembly adopted Resolution 181, the Partition Plan, by a vote of, they voted for it by a vote of 33 in favor, 13 against, and 10 abstentions. But this was the Partition Plan that the UN voted for, but it never got implemented. I'm going to tell you why in a moment. But it recommended partitioning. That's why it was called the Partition Plan. It recommended partitioning mandatory Palestine, as it was called in those days, mandatory Palestine into independent Jewish and Arab states, because that is the indigenous peoples. Notice the word Palestinian isn't there because it wasn't an ethnic group. The mandatory Palestine was to be broken into independent Jewish and Arab states with Jerusalem under an international oversight. The countries of Egypt, as I said a moment ago, Egypt, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Pakistan, and Turkey, along with Afghanistan, and we're going to throw in Cuba, Greece, India, and Iran in there, they all voted against the Partition Plan. Why? Why, you might ask? I thought they wanted a two-state solution. No. They rejected the plan primarily because it created a Jewish state alongside an Arab one. The Arab Higher Committee and the Arab League rejected it outright and indicated they would oppose partition by force. The Jewish agency and representatives, they accepted it. But because a Jewish state was also to be created alongside a Palestinian state, or an Arab state, actually. I don't believe they even used the terminology Palestinian state back then. But because a Jewish state was to be created, and listen to this, on less than 13% of the territory. Less than 13%. 6 out of the 8 countries then went to war to destroy the establishment of Israel. That's exactly what happened. Once Israel declared their independence, those Arab states immediately attacked them. So remember that. The next time someone tries to tell you that Israel is the villain in this two-state charade. And by the way, that land allocation plan that Israel got, that 13% of the territory where the plan did take shape. Let me back up a little bit. At the end of the day, Israel, under the plan proposed, the Jewish state, we're talking about the 13% regarded all of the area. Let me be a little bit more clear. All of the territory of mandatory Palestine and Transjordan. Remember, Jordan was already created roughly in, what did I say earlier, 1926? When 1946, I'm sorry, Jordan was created in 1946. By the way, Jordan was created for the Arabs. Those are Transjordan. That's where the Palestinians were originally supposed to be. That was it. But the tribes and the clans didn't want these, but other tribes and clans. So they said no. It's funny how history works. But once in mandatory Palestine, that was going to be created into a Jewish state and a Arab state. The Israelis got 50. Where are my numbers? Here it is. 55% of the territory of mandatory Palestine, which was west of the Jordan River. We now call that the West Bank, which is Judea and Samaria. And the quote-unquote Arabs, or modern-day Palestinian terminology, were going to get about 42 to 43%, and a small international zone around Jerusalem, as I said a moment ago. But here's the other thing. This is where prophecy comes into play, folks. Much of the Jewish allocation, which they got, was the arid Negev wilderness. They got the desert. We're going to give the Jews the desert. We're going to give them the Negev. But, again, the maneuverings and machinations of men and of nations are nothing but the determinations of the prophetic determinations of the living God. Because by giving the Jews the Negev, they were fulfilling, I believe, Isaiah 35, 1 and 2, where it says the wilderness and the wasteland shall be glad for them. And the desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose. It shall blossom abundantly and rejoice, even with joy and singing. And Israel turned their land, which was desert and wilderness and barren and forsaken for almost 2,000 years, they turned it into a thriving nation. Unlike what the Palestinians did in Gaza that I went through in the first block. But as soon as this land allocation was given, then Israel declared independence, as you well know, on May 14th in 1948. War immediately broke out, the 1948 War of Independence. As the British mandate ended, armies from the neighboring Arab states invaded. Welcome to the neighborhood, Israel. They invaded Israel immediately, even though the land was legally given to them according to the UN mandates. Just like all the other lands, Syria and Lebanon that I went through. I went through that list in the first block for a reason. The duplicity and the hypocrisy is off the charts. But as soon as Israel declared their independence, the forces came from Egypt and from Jordan, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. Saudi Arabia contributed forces that operated under Egyptian command. Yemen and Pakistan also had some involvement by way of political support and other contributions. So these countries invaded. But here's the key point and takeaway. The stated goal of the invading nations, the stated goal, this is what they said, of the invading states was to prevent the establishment of the Jewish state. And in their public positions, they wanted to create a unified, unitary Arab Palestine. Well, whatever happened to that two-state solution thing? It was never there from the beginning. The Arab countries, their leadership rejected the two-state partition and chose war instead. And the war followed immediately after Israel's declaration of independence. Interesting thing, and you could find this in the New York Times archives. But the New York Times on Sunday, May 16th, 1948, the day after Israel's declaration of independence, or 2 days later, the headline in the New York Times said this. They would never print this today, but this was the New York Times on May 16th in 1948. Jews in grave danger in all Muslim lands. The subtitle, 900,000 in Africa, Jews they're speaking of, 900,000 Jews in Africa and Asia face the wrath of their foes. It was written by Mallory Brown, a special writer for the New York Times. And as I just alluded to, the newspaper report talked about the precarious situation of roughly 900,000 Jews, not even living in Israel, but in the Arab Muslim majority countries from Morocco to India and Asia in the aftermath of the UN partition vote and the outbreak of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. It shows the hostility. It shows the discrimination against the Jews, all coming from the Arab League and the Muslim nations. And like I said, you can see the article. You can go and look at it it's preserved in the New York Times archive, and it's widely cited, by the way, in historical discussions of the time. But let's keep scrolling. Let's keep walking down. Let's keep strolling down memory lane from 1947 to 1948, because then in June of 1967, Israel, based on its own intelligence gathering, but here's a key thing. Israel they've got the greatest intelligence on the planet, but based on its own intelligence gathering, but also coaxed, I'll say it again, they were coaxed into a war by Russian disinformation. The Russians put forth disinformation that Egypt and Jordan were about to attack Israel. So Israel did a preemptive strike. They conducted a preemptive strike on Egypt, Syria, and Jordan in what is now known as the 6-Day War from June 5th to the 10th of 1967. In that conflict, Israel defeated the armies of Egypt, Jordan, and Syria and captured the Sinai Peninsula in 1967, the Gaza Strip, which technically belonged to Israel anyway, but not yet by way of the partition of 1947. But they captured Gaza. They captured the West Bank, again, Judea, Samaria, which belongs to them, including East Jerusalem and the Golan Heights. And as the saying goes, folks, yes, Israel did a preemptive strike, but it was based on the fact that Jordan and Egypt and Syria were about to attack them anyway. So, as the saying goes, to the victors go the spoils. And the Arabs have been crying ever since 1967 about the quote-unquote the occupation. Except it was Israel's historic homeland in the first place, and they simply want it back. And except for the Sinai Peninsula, which Israel did in fact return back to Egypt. Yes, they gave the Sinai Peninsula back to Egypt, because God gave the land to Israel, and the Sinai Peninsula was never part of it. But God gave them their land back, Gaza and the West Bank. God gave back to them, just as in the days of Joshua, by my evaluation of things. God gave them the land of Israel. God gave them the land as Israel's inheritance in the days of Joshua, and he gave it back to them after the enemies attacked them in 1967. Funny how that works, huh? All according to the scriptures, all according to the prophetic framework that has been given. Israel returned, as I said a moment ago, the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt on April 25th, 1982, after the signing of the Egypt-Israel Peace Treaty following the 1978 Camp David Accords. The peace treaty has held up since then. Again, Sinai was never part of Israel's territory given under Joshua, which is a major reason why I believe, I've shared this in the past, I believe if the Arabs were really, really interested and concerned about a Palestinian state, then give them the Sinai Peninsula. I mean, Egypt doesn't want them, even though most of the Gazans are Egyptians, but they still don't want them. Funny how that works. Jordan doesn't want them. Give them the Sinai Peninsula. If you're really concerned about a two-state solution, they're not, and I'm being rhetorical, but I say give them the Sinai. Because after all, again, the Palestinians, the leadership, they themselves say they're of Egyptian descent. Hamas Minister of the Interior and National Security, the Hamas Minister of the Interior and National Security, this guy's name was Fatih Hamad, speaking on Egyptian TV back in 2012. Quote, this is what he said on Egyptian TV. Brothers, half of the Palestinians are Egyptians, and the other half are Saudis. Who are the Palestinians? He said, folks, this is the historical record. He's saying it. This is the leader of Hamas. Who are the Palestinians? Egyptians and Saudis. We have many families, quoting him again, we have many families called Al-Masri, that's Egyptian, whose roots are Egyptian. Egyptian, I tell you. They may be from Alexandria, from Cairo, from Tunisia, from the north, from Aswan, from Upper Egypt. We are Egyptians. Well then, why do you want Gaza? Why don't you just take the Sinai Peninsula? Yes, and by way of reminder, Yasser Arafat, the founder of the PLO, was an Egyptian. I'm going to take a break here, folks. We got a lot more strolling to do down memory lane. And I'm going to continue to roll with this over the course of today's broadcast. Because as I said at the top of the show, I'm doing this compilation, this amalgamation of the historical record according to a timeline so that you have it. You can go back and take notes. You can go back and reference it. Every time somebody wants to talk about, stolen land or Israel is intransient regarding a two-state solution, that is a flipping of the script. That's an absolute lie. And I believe this broadcast needs to be in your saved broadcasts folder as a future reference for when you might need it in the days ahead to discuss with your friends and whatever debates you might get into. That's why I'm compiling this so you have it at an easy, one-stop shop kind of a thing. Anyway, I'll be back in a moment to continue with the stroll down memory lane. I'll be back. The fusion of heart, mind, and soul. You are listening to Open Up the Doors here on Faith FM, WEGB 90.7 and 93.3 in that peak, WEGQ 91.7 in Quad. Just real quick broadcast memo notes, and I'm going to get back on our stroll down memory lane, but the first hour of this broadcast will re-air today at 3 p.m. Thursday, and it will re-air again on Saturday at 1 p.m. And of course, if you missed the broadcast or any part you want to hear it again, this is exactly why we've got our YouTube channel and our Rumble channel, to be a resource for you. If you're on YouTube or Rumble, just look up Andy White, Open Up the Doors, and subscribe to either or both of my video platforms. I appreciate it so much. Also, please comment on the videos. Comment. I don't care, good, bad, ugly, just comment on them. Let's get into a conversation. You got questions. I totally am up for that. Just don't be nasty. Even if you don't agree with me, just don't be nasty, because I'll just get nasty back, and I don't like doing that. I'm only kidding. But really, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, my Rumble channel. You can also find me on X if you're on that platform at AJ White 777. I'm on the X platform. I'm on Truth Social as well at AJ White. Also have a group page on Truth Social, the Open Up the Doors group page on Truth Social as well. All right, the call-in number is 631-725-2069, 631-725-2069. If you'd like to call in the second hour. But I want to get back to this stroll down memory lane. I hope I can finish this before the first hour is up. I'm not sure I can. Honestly, there's too much juicy good stuff here. There really is. Where did I leave off? I left off, I believe, with the 6-Day War in 1967. Yes, I did. And then in 1977, I quoted. This is an important quote here from the PLO Executive Council member Zawahir Moshan on Egyptian TV. The Palestinian people does not exist. This wasn't a right-wing Zionist thing in this. This was the PLO council member. They understand what they're doing. The creation of a Palestinian state is only a means for continuing our struggle against the state of Israel. Bingo! I said in the first block, it's a euphemism for the final solution. Because the PLO, the Hamas charter, calls for the eradication of Israel. They have not denounced that. So then in 19 then of course, I'm sorry, I'm leaving one out. Then there was the Yom Kippur War in October 1973. Again, it was a surprise attack launched by Egypt and Syria against Israel on the Jewish holiday, of course, of Yom Kippur. And again, Israel miraculously won. But you know what they won then? They got back control of Jerusalem. Although that might have really, I might be a little confused myself. That might have happened with the 6-Day War, actually, 1967. Yeah, I'm conflating a few things because there's been so much of a repeated thing that sometimes you can conflate this stuff. But again, let's just do a quick overview of the two-state solution facade. Just a quick overview. In the 1947 UN partition plan, the UN planned to split the British Mandate of Palestine into two states, one Jewish, one Arab, and an international coalition would govern over Jerusalem. What the Palestinians would get? They would get an independent Arab state with most of the fertile land, while the Jewish state was primarily in the infertile desert, the Negev. The plan was never implemented as proposed because the Arab side rejected it and war followed. Then in 1967, after the 6-Day War, there was another summit called the Khartoum Summit and UN Resolution 242. As I said, Israel won the 6-Day War and gained new territory. The UN passed a resolution calling for the withdrawal of Israeli forces from occupied areas, and they eventually did let the Sinai Peninsula go. The rest of it, they didn't because it's their land. It's not them who are occupying it. It's Arabs who do not want to be part of a Jewish state. By the way, another proof of the non-genocide of Gaza. You know, the genocide lie. I talked about that a month ago. Before the Gazan war, there were 2.1 million Gazans in Gaza. That population is essentially the same today. That aside, do you know how many Arabs live in Israel proper? How many? If Israel was committing genocide against Arabs, if Israel was committing genocide against quote-unquote Palestinians, remember a people group that doesn't exist, according to them, then there wouldn't be any Arabs, you would think, inside of Israel. You know what the population, the Arab population inside of Israel is? It's a little bit larger than the population of Gaza. It's almost 2.5 million Arab Israelis who are part of the nation of Israel, who vote, who are in the Knesset, who live and breathe, and they're Israeli citizens. So if Israel was trying to commit genocide, that wouldn't even exist. The whole thing is a charade. It's a facade. It's a lie. The reason I started talking about this 1967 Khartoum resolution, what the Palestinians would get, a chance to form an autonomous entity in the West Bank and Gaza that could be recognized as a state. There it is. It was 1967. They were going to be given a state. What happened? At the summit in Khartoum, the Arab League famously declared no peace, no recognition, no negotiations. Accepting Israel as a Jewish state is out of the question. That is a direct quote. Full stop. Full stop. Then in 1993, we had the Oslo Accords. This gets really big. I'm not going to have time to finish this. I'm going to have to roll this into the second hour. But in 1993, we had the Oslo Accords. Direct negotiations between Israel and the PLO led to a signing a multi-stage agreement. There was an agreement signed. Israel accepted the PLO as the representatives of the Palestinians. And in that agreement, the Palestinians ostensibly, and I would stress ostensibly, renounced terrorism and recognized Israel's right to exist. Except I said ostensibly because they practice taqiyya. But according to the Oslo Accords, what Palestinians would get, they would get to establish their state on the West Bank and Gaza for a 5-year period, test period. Then talks would be held to determine the permanent status of borders, Jerusalem, and refugees. Why did it fail? Well, the Palestinian Authority was established. However, the assassination of Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and continued terror attacks by Hamas, the Oslo Accords just stalled. And by the way, just so no one misunderstands, Rabin was not killed by Hamas or the Palestinians. Rabin was killed by a radical, overzealous Jew who didn't want a Palestinian state. Yes, it can be on both sides as well. Bottom line is the 1993 Oslo Accords basically went into a place of stalemate until the 2000 Camp David Accords. I'm down to a minute. I'm going to have to pick this up after the break. The 2000 Camp David Summit. Yeah, I'm gonna put that on pause right there, and we'll come back to it because I got to button up this first hour, and I only got a few seconds left to button it up. But the bottom line is this: the historical record shows that the Arabs, the quote-unquote Palestinians, have never had any real interest in peace with Israel under any circumstances. That fact is reinforced daily to this day by their leaders' pronouncements, the incessant terror and incitement. And most tragically, an education system that we can get into that teaches children hatred and intolerance against Jews and deceitfully denies the historical Jewish connection to the land of Israel. They never wanted two states, and they still don't. They just want the end of one. The Palestinian Muslim Arabs have never been prepared to share any part of the land that they claim as their own, because it is an ideological position based in large measure on Islam, on the view that Jews have no place in the Islamic world except as second-class citizens, otherwise known as dhimmis, under Muslim rule. But I'm out of time for this first hour, and I am definitely going to have to pick this up because we got to continue the stroll down memory lane after the news. I'll be back. And I am back for the second hour, the 11 o'clock hour of Open Up the Doors here. The fusion of heart, mind, and soul. If you hung out from the first hour, I really appreciate it. Welcome back. If you're just joining me for the second hour because it happens to be your lunch hour, then welcome aboard. You're going to have a lot of catching up to do, but these broadcasts will be uploaded to my Rumble and YouTube channels after they are polished and refined up in post-production. As I shared in the first hour, I really would love and hope and appreciate that you would share this particular broadcast around, save it to yourselves, use it for future reference. It's chock full of historical facts that are irrefutable, which we will continue to get to throughout the rest of this broadcast today. The phone number is 631-725-2069, 631-725-2069. But I will say this, I may hesitate going to the phones because I really do want to try and get all of this compilation of the historical record. And really, it's still the tip of the iceberg, honestly. Obviously, you can't do 80 years of history in a few moments, but I'm trying to give you a compilation that you have at your fingertips and see the connections and the false narrative that is constantly leveled against Israel, against them being the impediments to peace and them being against the two-state solution, which today they actually are, and rightfully so. I'll get to some of that. Today they finally are. Netanyahu is saying under his administration there will never be a two-state solution. And he's right, because as I shared in the first hour, October 7th proved what the real intention are. As I shared in the first hour, the two-state solution is nothing but a rebranded euphemistic phrase, ultimately, at least in the Arab mind, for the final solution. And we've been taking this, if you're just joining us for the second hour, I've been going down the historical record from 1947 to 1948 to 1967 to 1970, 73 and 77 and 2000. I think I made it up to 2000 in the first hour. We're going to continue because there's some stuff I need to go over with the Oslo Accords. But 1947, 1967, 2000, 2007, multiple negotiations, my friends, multiple negotiations through the years. Multiple opportunities for peace. Over and over, Israel has said yes. But the Palestinian leaders, they have rejected the deal that meant accepting a Jewish state alongside it. They've rejected it every time because it's not about a two-state solution. It was never about borders or Jerusalem or even the right of return, as they claim. It was always about, and it's still about, erasing Israel, the final solution to the Jewish problem. That's what it's about. And as I left off, with the Camp David summit. I'm going to pick up from there. So we have a seamless timeline through going through this broadcast. Because after the Oslo Accords basically failed and fell apart, could never fully be implemented, as I said, because of the assassination of Rabin and then the continued Hamas terror attacks, even though it was agreed that terrorism would stop. I said it was ostensibly the Takia. You cannot negotiate with people that want you dead. But anyway, we get to the 2000 Camp David summit. The second stage of talks promised, which really was the second stage of talks promised in the Oslo Accords, which were finally held in the year 2000 under the Bill Clinton administration. The negotiations aimed to settle all the final status issues and were considered basically all or nothing. What the Palestinians would get? An independent state in most of the West Bank. Well, isn't what this is all about? Isn't this what they want? No, it's a two-state canard. That's the title broadcast of today's broadcast. The two-state canard. What they would get would be, according to the Camp David summit, they would get that two-state. They would get most of the West Bank. They would have gotten control over Arab neighborhoods in East Jerusalem and a peace agreement. Now let's get into why it failed. Despite Israeli concessions, Yasser Arafat, at the last minute, rejected the deal. Even the Saudis were blown away. I'll get to that in a moment. Yasser Arafat and the PLO were basically getting 97% of what they wanted. Now remember, when you go to negotiations, you got to do give and take. No one ever gets 100%, but they were getting 97% of what they wanted. And at the last minute, Arafat declined the deal. This is historic, folks. This is why I say today, Hamas, Hezbollah, the whole entire world that comes against Israel, They don't have a leg to stand on. They never have. But this was definitely I was going to say this was definitely the nail in the coffin, but no. The nail in the coffin happened 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago on October 7th. According to the Camp David summit, as I said a moment ago, they would get an independent state in most of the West Bank, control over Arab neighborhoods. I said that already. Why did it fail? Because of Yasser Arafat rejecting the deal. U.S. President Bill Clinton openly and publicly and even bitterly blamed Yasser Arafat for the failure. And here's another interesting tidbit of palace intrigue. Here's something I bet most people don't know, but it's historically factual. Arafat rejected it for several reasons, mainly because he was afraid he was very much afraid, not mainly afraid, but very much afraid of the pushback he would get from the Arab world to be negotiating with Israel, because the whole thing is a facade. You're only supposed to go through the motions of a negotiating. You're only supposed to go through the rhetoric of peace. You're only supposed to go through the rhetoric of a two-state solution. You're not actually supposed to do it. But here's a piece of trivia, which isn't too trivial, of what finally made Arafat reject it. Because he was getting prompted. He was getting very much pressured from the anti-Semitic Jimmy Carter. Yeah, Jimmy Carter was counseling Arafat to reject any deal with Israel. The very duplicitous, I might say, Jimmy Carter, who hypocritically and publicly would pontificate for a two-state solution, while all along it was he who undermined the best deal the Palestinians could have ever hoped for. Back in that 2000 summit with Clinton, Arafat, and Ehud Barak, the Carter administration, well, he wasn't in the administration. Carter recommended. It was obviously the Clinton administration, obviously. But Carter recommended, this is a quote from people who know, people who heard, people who were there. I'm quoting this actually from the writings of Alan Dershowitz, who was a lifelong Democrat and a liberal at that time. He's still a liberal. But Alan Dershowitz had first-hand knowledge of these events. And Dershowitz has publicly stated and has written, that's where I got this quote from, Dershowitz's writing. He said that, he wrote that, quote, Jimmy Carter recommended to Yasser Arafat that Yasser Arafat turn down the deal that would have resulted in the Palestinian state. Let me say that again. Dershowitz claims to know this for a fact, so I can only take him at his word. But Carter recommended to Yasser Arafat that Yasser Arafat would turn down the deal that would have resulted in a Palestinian state. And that's exactly what happened. Bill Clinton had brokered the deal with Ehud Barak and Arafat, giving the PLO everything they wanted. And Arafat turned it down. From July 11th through the 24th of the year 2000, the record shows, we have the records, we know this is history. President Clinton presided over the second Camp David Accords with Prime Minister Barak and made this thing, the Saudi prince at the time, the Saudi crown prince at the time was Bandar bin Sultan. And he said it was the best offer that Arafat could have ever have possibly expected. Even the Saudi crown prince couldn't believe it. He turned it down. It was an historic offer, as I said. Arafat and the Palestinians would have received 97% of the West Bank and Gaza Strip, and only and they would have also gotten 3% of Israeli land. But remember what God says in Joel: He's going to come against the nations that divide up his land. Because this is where all these two-state solution peace deals go. And they never go in Israel's favor. And God's going to make the nations give an account of it at the end of the day, my friends. But in that deal, which was turned down, they would have gotten 3% of Israeli land as well. And the Palestinian Authority capital in East Jerusalem, which is what they've been crying about for decades. All that was required of Yasser Arafat and the PLO was an end to the conflict. He couldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. And again, you know why Arafat couldn't and wouldn't do the deal? Because most likely Arafat, who was of the Fatah party, was afraid of the repercussions, as I said a moment ago, that would come from Hamas. Because Fatah and Hamas have always been at odds with one another. That's their own civil war going on. When Hamas took control of Gaza in 2007, I believe it was, they slaughtered a lot of the Fatah political members. And as bad as Arafat's PLO, Fatah party was, Hamas is even worse. And by the way, Mahmoud Abbas today in the West Bank, that's the Fatah party. The Fatah party is jurisdiction as far as the Palestinians are concerned. It's really Israeli jurisdiction, but in their minds, the Palestinian state on the West Bank, in their minds, is under the leadership of Mahmoud Abbas, who's Fatah, and of course the Gaza Strip is under Hamas. I'm not going to get into the creation of Hamas, but Hamas was created in 1987 in Gaza as the militant military wing of the Muslim Brotherhood. I've talked about that. I'm not going to get into all that stuff right now. But the bottom line is this, for the record: a Palestinian state, in Hamas's view, would be part of the larger Islamic caliphate. They're not looking for a two-state solution. They're looking for a one-state solution, the Islamic caliphate, with Jews not allowed in Islamic lands. That's why the Jews have been kicked out of Islamic lands mostly. If you're a Jew in an Islamic country, it's one of two things. You either get kicked out or you live as a second-class citizen, paying the jizya tax and living in dimitude. Oh, the people, so many people, again, who do not know history, talk about, the Jews thrived in Islamic lands. No, they did not. That, again, is a rewriting. That's woke history. They did not thrive in Islamic lands. They were living in dimitude. If they even, I'll go back to that New York Times article from 1948. I talked about it in the first block. Go look it up. New York Times. 900,000 Jews across the Mideast in dreadful danger as they're being persecuted and attacked all over North Africa and the Mideast the day after Israel declared its independence in Muslim lands. At the Camp David meeting, Dennis Ross, who I do believe was he was the ambassador to Israel at the time. Dennis Ross has said that there was no comprehensive final settlement offered from the PLO. The Israeli and American negotiators put forth ideas regarding borders in Jerusalem and land transfers. One of those was a Palestinian state comprised of 4 cantons or 4 districts, like counties, so to speak. Arafat rejected these suggestions. Yet he didn't raise a single idea himself. You see, it wasn't really about a good faith negotiation. It was about the PR. It was about the photo ops. It was never about actually accomplishing anything. And that's in the record. Shlomo Ben Ami, one of Israel's negotiators, who took copious notes at the closed meeting and kept meticulous diaries of the proceedings, said that Clinton exploded at the Palestinians over their refusal to make a counteroffer. A summit's purpose, Bill Clinton said, and he's right, a summit's purpose is to have discussions that are based on sincere intentions. And you, the Palestinians, did not come to this summit with sincere intentions. Then he got up and left the room. That's in the historical record. So again, when I say the two-state solution is a canard, it's a hoax, it's nothing but a political weapon, I know exactly what I'm talking about, because that is what the historical record shows. After the Bill Clinton, we got more to go down memory lane here, because after the Camp David Accords in 2000, in 2007, 2008, there was another conference. It was called the Annapolis Conference and the Olmert Plan. Israeli Prime Minister at that time, Ehud Olmert, and Palestinian Authority President, here he is, Mahmoud Abbas, they met one-on-one multiple times to negotiate a peace deal. This is 2007, 2008. What the Palestinians would get: a state consisting of over 90% of the West Bank, Gaza, and land swaps for major settlement blocks, and a plan for shared governance over Jerusalem's holy sites. Why did it fail? Lo and behold, after months of direct talks, Abbas, like Arafat, refused to sign Olmert's offer, deferring to Palestinian leadership. The Palestinians effectively ghosted, to put it in modern language, ghosted the Israelis. They didn't answer him. Yeah, we're getting everything we want, but, we really can't do this deal. I know we say we want to do it, but we really don't want to do it. The Annapolis Conference, I don't want to get into the weeds of all that. Olmert's, just like in Camp David, Olmert's September 2008 proposal was the most far-reaching offer by an Israeli prime minister at the time. Actually exceeded even the one in 2000. It included a Palestinian state on 93 to 94% of the West Bank. And they said, nah, not good enough. Exactly the point. I mean, is anybody noticing a pattern here? I mean, really, is anybody noticing a pattern here? Abbas did not accept the offer. Arafat did not accept the offer. And yet today we're constantly told Israel is an impediment to peace. Lies and propaganda that get inculcated into people who are historically illiterate and ignorant. And there's no reason to be. Anybody can do the research I did. It's gotten so much. It has gotten so easy to do this research. We've got the internet. We've got super fast search engines. Now, it took me a while to compile this stuff, and it took me a lot of reading, and it took me a lot of vetting of facts, because I just don't accept something because somebody might have said it. Everything I'm presenting in this broadcast today is absolutely, irrefutably, historically correct. Now, you might have a different interpretation of the facts, but the facts don't change. But Arafat didn't accept the offer. Abbas didn't accept the offer. He has stated he rejected it, Mahmoud Abbas. He rejected it because he said he didn't have time to study the proposal. What? What? Once again, just like in the Camp David the Camp David Accords, the Camp David summit meetings, no formal counter-proposal was advanced by Mahmoud Abbas. No formal counter-proposal was advanced in the Annapolis Conference, just like no counter-proposal was advanced during Camp David. And it just fell by the wayside. 1947, 1967, 2000, 2007, until we get to today. And now, today, it's when Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is now saying that in his administration, and because this is a large majority of Israelis insist now there will never be a Palestinian state. Again, go back and listen to my first hour. We saw what a quote-unquote Palestinian state would look like with Gaza. I'm not going to reiterate all that. I did that in the first hour. So now when they've finally said, you know what, we've given them opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. And they repaid that opportunity. Every time we made a deal, we left Gaza in 2005. We left. And many Israelis were upset. I remember about that under Ariel Sharon. Ariel Sharon. I remember what happened. The Israelis were really upset that they were giving up Gaza. But he said, land for peace. Land for peace. It didn't happen. And it will never happen. The scriptures tell us it will never happen. Oh, yes, there will be peace deals. There will be a covenant with the many, the Bible tells us. And that one will be broken. True to form. I'll be back in a moment. Keep it right here. If you'd like to call in, that would be a great time. 631-725-2069. 631-725-2069. The fusion of heart, mind, and soul. This is Open Up the Doors with Danny White here on Faith FM, WEGB 90.7 and 93.3 in that peak, and WEGQ 91.7 in Quag, letting the light in and the truth out. The phones are open. 631-725-2069. I will take your phone calls. I do have some more stuff here, but I got through the bulk of what I wanted to get through. There is some stuff that brings us up to the present day, of course, and I will continue with that. But I would love to hear from you if you want to call in. 631-725-2069. 631-725-2069. So somebody might say, well, Brother Andy, why are you bringing this all up? Why are you belaboring, so to speak? Now, I don't think I'm belaboring anything personally, because I'm a bit of a history buff anyway. I just love history. And in this particular context of the Israeli situation and the amount of propaganda that's thrown out there and the amount of lies that people believe, it is important, brothers and sisters, to understand history. It is important to understand the historical context of what we're dealing with here. So when people say that Israel is intransient and Israel is a roadblock and blah, 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 it is an absolute falsehood, as the historical record shows. Now, to the extent that maybe now they're finally really are saying, no way is there going to be a two-state solution. Well, can you blame them now? Now, really? Would you want your next door neighbor to be someone who moves in, who is committed to annihilating you? Wouldn't you be concerned about that? Yeah, well, and this is the point. And this is the point of the foolishness of the world, who are still harping on this. It's really preposterous, in light of history, preposterous idea of a two-state solution. Again, it is a ploy. It is a ploy and a hoax. It is, I'm going to keep saying it because I'm hoping that by saying it enough, you'll understand that the two-state solution is just the modern-day nomenclature for the final solution as far as Islam is concerned. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm sure in the West there are some people who are naive enough to believe, again, although I don't know how I could be naive enough to believe after what happened on October 7th of 2023. Nevertheless, there are people who are naive enough to believe that, yes, you can still make peace with the scorpion. You can still make peace with the cobra. Now, I think they're absolutely foolish, but if that's what they really believe. But here's the point. It's just foolishness. And about a week or so ago, Melanie Phillips, who is an excellent author and British journalist, she's a broadcaster over there in Britain. I'm not sure. Melanie Phillips might live in Israel, but she is British. Either way, she puts out very, very, very good stuff. And she writes a weekly column for the JNS network, the Jewish News. What does that stand for? Jewish News Syndicate? I think that's what it is. Jewish News Syndicate. And she's also a columnist for the Times of London. But last week, in a lengthy article, I'm not going to get too much into it, but she really kind of nailed it she just nailed the hammer. She nailed it with the hammer. She nailed the head of the nail. Whatever that saying is. Yeah. She wrote this in a column just this past week or last week. And I'm like, yeah, she's right. She's right. Because in light of everything I just told you, in light of the history, in light of October 7th, in light of everything that we've been seeing up until this point for the last 80 years, not to mention the last 3 years, she writes, it's absolutely jaw-dropping that Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law and senior aide, met with Hamas leaders last weekend in Cairo. Now, I do believe it was about 2 weeks ago. Yeah, Jared Kushner met with Hamas leaders in Cairo. What happened? What happened? Whatever happened to we do not negotiate with terrorists? That was my own rhetorical question. She did not put that in her article. I'll go on with her article. His aim, Jared Kushner's aim, was to break the impasse caused by a row between Israel and Hamas over the Board of Peace, which I might have time to get into, I don't know. The Board of Peace initiative for a permanent agreement in Gaza. And then she wrote this, and she is spot on. She wrote, once again, American officials have failed to grasp that Islamist terrorists will lie shamelessly and sign ceasefires just to break them. You cannot argue with that. I've been saying this for I don't even know, from time immemorial. We in the West have never understood Islam. We're understanding it more and more as it exposes itself more and more. Because the reason being is because the only Islam we've ever really seen was the westernized version of it, where Muslims really did acclimate because it was just a cultural thing. They didn't really practice Islam. I knew Muslims growing up. It was just another religion. But they lived just like the rest of us. They didn't live like the Islamic republics of Saudi Arabia and Iran under this oppressive women wearing burqas and covering up their entire bodies except for their eyes. I mean, I shared this a couple of weeks ago about how I saw right here in Ronkonkoma, at the Ronkonkoma train station. It's not right here. It's up island a little bit. But I saw someone in a burqa, a woman, obviously a woman. Well, I'm thinking it's a woman after all. I mean, it could have been a terrorist, which is why some countries in Europe are saying no more burqas, because you know what? You don't know what's under that thing. But ostensibly, it's a woman. But what an oppression. I felt so bad. I know she doesn't, I don't know what she thought. I didn't know her. But I was looking at her and looking at this person in a burqa. And I felt such sadness for her. Not realizing the oppressiveness, It was satanic. I'm not saying she was satanic. The poor woman is under some kind of spiritual delusion that's been brainwashed into her. The demonic. It's a demonic deception. I went down a bunny trail with that. But my point is saying that we in the West have never understood. And this is what Melanie Phillips is getting at. For Jared Kushner to go to Egypt to hammer out some things with Hamas, it just, once again, it just shows you the insanity of what, Now you might say, well, they're trying to work out a peace deal. Sorry. We've gone through 80 years of that. Hamas needs to be eradicated. The Iranian regime needs to be eradicated. Stop trying to appease them. Stop trying to think that a leopard can change its colors. Because, folks, instead of understanding that no deal would be worth the paper it was written on, Kushner goes down to Cairo to grovel to a bunch of psychopathic mass murderers. Yeah, there are people getting saved in the midst of all of that. People will be getting saved because God is not willing that any should perish. That is a given. That's we don't take that for granted, of course. But the point of today's broadcast was to put in a concise, easy to reference broadcast the facts that you need to have to argue the points and to help people to understand the situation as it really is, to really sift through the propaganda, sift through the lies, understand the historical facts. And yes, God's working in the midst of all of that. But we've got to understand the reasons of, we've got to understand the reasoning of the Israelis, because the world is coming against them. They're surrounded by nations that want to see them destroyed from the river into the sea. Palestine will be free. There is no room for negotiations with those who want to see your annihilation. And until we understand that fully, nothing will change. Now, the days are going to come, prophetically speaking, when they will be forced into an agreement. And that lays out the prophetic blueprint, the prophetic declarations of why God does deal with the nations as he does deal with the nations. Because time and time again, he says it in Joel. He says it in Ezekiel 37 and 38. He says 38 and 39, rather. 38 and 39. He says it in Zechariah 12 through 14 about how he's going to deal with the nations who have sought to destroy his people Israel in his land. It's his land. We say, well, it's Israeli land. Of course it's Israeli land. But it was given to them by an everlasting Abrahamic covenant. And we need to understand and see the large picture. Going back to this Melanie Phillips article, I mean, I think she just really nailed it, because it was really ridiculous for Jared Kushner to meet with the Hamas leaders. And I've been saying for a long time that Kushner and Steve Witkoff and Tom Barrack, there's something going on with Tom Barrack, the ambassador to Turkey. He may be removed. I brought him up a little bit last week, and over the course of the last week, he's been recalled. I don't know if you heard this news. Here's an aside that plays into all of this. I don't know if it was last week or the week before. I was talking about how Tom Barrack is an absolute. He's supposed to be the ambassador of the U.S. representing the administration's positions, and he's off there going rogue. He's representing more of Turkey's positions and more of Syria's positions, and he has been given the Trump administration, I believe, really, really, really bad advice regarding Erdogan and regarding al-Sharaa. And I've been saying this for a long time. And now I think it's finally catching up with the administration, because Tom Barak, or Barak, whatever his last name is, Barak, has been recalled to Washington for consultations. And will he remain the ambassador to Turkey? We'll probably know in a day or two. Maybe they're just going to give him a spanking. I don't know. But it plays into all of this. Let me just finish up some of the thoughts from Melanie Phillips' article. But she was talking about how there's an impasse there between the Board of Peace and Israel and whatnot. Well, that's, again, because Hamas has not been keeping up with there's an impasse there because Hamas is refusing to honor the agreement that they signed just last October. They said they would disarm, and now they're not disarming. And Israel saying, well, we're not going to withdraw from Gaza until you disarm. So we got that back and forth going on because Hamas squarely rejects any disarmament plan or peace process. They're just going to continue to be what they've always done, drag this out. Because Hamas does not seek a Palestinian state living alongside Israel. Hamas seeks a Palestinian state replacing Israel. And that's why it led to Netanyahu just on the other day saying that there will never be a Palestinian state as long as he is prime minister. The Board of Peace, however, which in large measure is, again, these European powers and Turkey's involved, this Board of Peace says its ultimate aim is precisely that, to create the conditions for a pathway for Palestinian self-determination and statehood. And there we have, going full circle, something that's been going on now for about 80 years. But Hamas, Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and the Iranian regime are not looking for a two-state solution. They are fighting for a one-state solution without any Israel. So even after a peace deal, if it ever gets signed, and it eventually will, they will not stop planning for that final assault. That is what Ezekiel 38 and 39 is all about, and Joel and Zechariah. But the message that the Europeans are sending in their naivete, the message that they're sending to Hamas and other Palestinian terrorist groups is simply this: massacre Israelis, launch wars, reject compromise, and eventually the international community will pressure Israel enough to agree to its own destruction. I remember from last year what Ambassador Mike Huckabee had said to the Europeans, especially Macron, who kept saying that they were going to have a conference. They have had a conference in Paris regarding a two-state solution. And Huckabee said last year, you might remember this because it was great. Huckabee said, if France is really so determined to see a Palestinian state, I have a suggestion for him. Carve out a piece of the French Riviera. Yeah. Ultimately, my friends, I'm going to close up. I only got a minute left. Ultimately, the two-state solution will be the final solution, but not the one they were aiming for. It will be for the nations of the world that have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be remembered no more. Psalm 83, verse 4. And then the Lord's final solution to the problem will be realized, where he says, I will also gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and I will enter into judgment with them there on account of my people, my heritage, Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations. They have also divided up my land. But in the end, God himself will have the final solution. Amen and amen. I'm out of time. Please share this message once I get it up on YouTube and Rumble. I'll be back next week. In the meantime, watch, stand fast in the faith, be brave, be strong, and let all that you do be done in love.